Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ILS 195 online training this afternoon. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes still so they can continue to log in, but we'll begin momentarily. I hope that you're all hearing me, but I'll leave this information up for those who can't hear us. They can still dial in, and we'll begin shortly. Yes, from my screen here, I see that there are several folks who can see me, but likely cannot hear me. So I'll leave this up for those individuals so they can dial in and connect to us properly. Just bear with us a couple more minutes. All right, this seems to be working. I see a couple more people dialing in.
Your feature update could not be completed. Oh, yeah, that.
Bear with us for another minute or so, and we'll get this started. All right, looks like most of us are here. So let me welcome you again to this afternoon's ILS 195 online training. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. We hope this is informative. My name is Giza Lopez. I'm the Senior Research Associate for the Statewide Implementation Unit. Also delivering the training today is my colleague, Andy Davies, who's the Director of Research here at ILS. What we're going to do today is walk you through a few housekeeping items first. Then we're going to get to the training of the form proper, and then we're going to discuss the roles and responsibilities of data officers. So let's get the housekeeping items out of the way first. The one thing I'm going to ask you to do right now, if you haven't already done so, is to mute your line. This will minimize background noise as well as feedback. I can hear myself now, and I inevitably will get distracted. So if you haven't already done so, please mute your line. This will also allow for a cleaner recording. The session is being recorded. It will allow us to send you a link that's a little bit better in terms of audio. So thank you. I see that several of you have now muted your line. Thank you very much. A reminder that this is being recorded and we will receive a link with this session in the near future. And most importantly, we have experienced, as anyone dealing with webinars must have experienced in the past before, we have experienced some tech issues. You have there 2 phone numbers. We're on standby here. Should you get kicked off of this session, there are folks here that will help to connect you. These are the same numbers that were circulated in an email earlier today. So if you can't take notes of them right now, please refer to that email later. Again, I'm going to ask you to mute your line. I can hear folks talking. It can be distracting. Thank you so much. All right. We have built in several opportunities during this training for everybody to ask questions. I wanted to explain how you can pose your questions to us. You can do it in one of 2 ways. You can simply unmute your line and start speaking. We should be able to hear you. So if you choose to do it that way, just unmute your line and speak your question. Or you can submit your question in writing. To do so, let's take 1 minute here and do a test so that we make sure everybody knows how to use this function. If you've used it already, you can skip it, but it's an opportunity to make sure that we can see your questions as intended. So in the upper right corner of the screen, you will see a chat symbol. If you could click on that, it should open a chat box. You are welcome to type whatever you want in that chat box right now. I'm going to ask you to pay attention to this one little thing that makes all the difference. Before you send your question, make sure that you've selected the option to send to everyone. Right on top of the chat box, there's a drop-down menu that says send to ILS presenter, ILS host, or send to everyone. By sending to everyone, you ensure that everybody in the call today can see your question, but also that we can see your question. The way the computers are set up here in the room, if it goes to either the presenter or the host, we are likely not going to get to it until the end of the session. Eventually we will, and we'll provide you with an answer, but it would be much more productive and interactive if we could make sure to read your question live. So if you haven't done so already and you want to try it out, please click on that chat box, type in whatever you want. Thanks, Marisa, hello, and make sure that you're sending to everyone so that we can ensure that we see your questions. So go ahead and try that, please. Again, I'm Giza Lopez. I'm the Senior Research Associate for the Statewide Implementation Unit, Joanne McCree's team. I'm here with Andy Davies, our Director of Research. On the screen there, you will see a list of counties from which we have participants in this session. As you can see, this is a diverse group. We have folks from counties big and small, as well as New York City. We have folks from institutional defenders' offices. We have representatives from assigned council plans and from counties proper. So we have a diverse, interesting mix in the session today, and we have nearly a full house. So we anticipate a lot of questions and hope that we get them, and we should get this started. I'm going to thank everyone for using the chat box now. I can see several of you have been saying hello, so hello to you. Welcome. I'm going to get off camera now and give the space to Andy so he can start. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Andy Davis. I'm the Director of Research here at the Office of Indian Legal Services. Thank you very much for joining us here on this Friday afternoon. This is our 10th time doing this, 10 out of 10 times doing this training, so if we sound a bit delirious, apologies in advance. It's a pretty big group this afternoon. We are fully booked, roughly 25 people. So as Jesus said, if you have questions, you do have the option of just going ahead and speaking up, but my thought is that actually it might make more sense for us to do this in a slightly different way. We have an agenda here that we'll be working through in the next hour or so. It's divided into 5 sections. My plan is that after every one of these sections, so about every 10 minutes or so, I will actually stop and ask if anybody has any questions. I will check the chat box. I will see if there are any questions there and try and address those. With 25 people, if we have a free-for-all, it might just slow us down. So do type a question anytime that you have it, and then when we have those little breaks, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up. This is a system that's been working relatively well for us so far. So without further ado, I do want to just take us straight into the training. Our topic today is the ILS 195. It's an annual reporting form that providers and mandated representation across New York State are required to file pursuant to New York State County Law 722F. The ILS 195 is taking the place of an older form called the UCS 195, with which most people on this call are probably already familiar. It's already required to be submitted every year annually, but we will be transitioning to this new form in the next few years, and so this is to orientate you towards those changing data requirements. My plan today is to go through this 5-point agenda. In the first point, I shall be talking about what to expect in the next few years. That has to do simply with this transition between this old form and this new form. The old form will go away progressively over the course of several years while the new form is introduced, and I want to explain exactly how that's going to work, so you're properly on notice about how these requirements are going to step in. I also want to explain a little bit about why the changes are being made. Points 2 through 4 of this agenda here are the time when we will actually go into the new form and we will walk through it together. We will fill it out and you'll be able to see very clearly, hopefully, exactly what's being asked of you and be on notice, therefore, about these requirements, which will be becoming real in the year 2020, or will be beginning in that year anyway. And then item number 5 on the agenda is the discussion of data officers. At that point, I will hand back to Giza, who will be explaining about that part of ILS's programming here. I do see a couple of people might still not be patched into the audio, so in case that's true, I'll leave this slide up here for a moment and just collect my thoughts. If anybody, hopefully everybody can sign into the phones if they need to be signed in. Right, so moving right along. First item on my agenda was the transition to this new form over the next few years. And for that purpose, I shall go across first to our website. The reason I'm starting at the website is because I want to show you the place where you can get a lot of the resources that we'll be referring to today. This is our office website, ils.ny.gov, and if you come down here on the left to the place that says Annual Data Reporting and you click here, you'll be brought to this page, and you can see there's a subheading here for ILS 195. What you'll then see here is a link to about 10 different documents. We'll refer to a lot of these documents today. These provide some of the context and instructions and so on that we'll actually be working through. So I wanted to be able to show you where to get those later for reference if you need to. I am going to start, as a matter of fact, I seem to have lost the bottom of my screen here. Where is all that stuff? Oh, I know. Okay, I apologize. My mistake. I'm going to start, as I said I would, by talking a little bit about what's going to happen in the next few years in terms of the actual rollout of this new form. As most people and in order to do that, I've pulled up this document called the Timeline for the Rollout of the ILS 195. That can be found on our website under this link here, but I already have it open, so it's over here. Right now, as I mentioned, providers of mandated representation around the state are required to submit annually a form called the UCS 195. It goes to the Office of Court Administration. Beginning in 2019, authority over that form transfers to the Office of Indian Legal Services. As OCA has required this form to be submitted to it since the 1970s, and fundamentally it asks you to tell the Office of Court Administration how many cases you take, how many staff you have, and something about the money that you've been spending last year. That form's been transferred to us, and we're taking the opportunity of the transfer of that form to us to change the form. The reason we're changing the form are twofold. First, this old form has a number of problems. It's difficult to understand. The data it collects are not very useful for reasons that I don't need to go into now. It requires an overhaul anyway. But the second and probably more obvious reason is that this transfer of authority over the form has coincided in time with the making responsible of Indigent Legal Services for the expansion of the Harrell Herring reforms to the 52 non-defendant counties in the Harrell Herring suit across the state and to New York City. Those reforms require us to do certain things. They put us in a position of being able to fund counties in order to accomplish certain things like reducing caseloads and providing counsel at first appearance. everywhere and improving the quality of the representation that is being provided. Because we, as a state agency, need to be able to show that we are being successful in those initiatives, that as the money is flowing to us, we are using it to pay for things which then is reducing caseloads, is providing counselor superiors everywhere all the time, at least at some future time. We need to get certain kinds of data from providers and mandated representation to show that those changes are actually happening. And so that's why we've chosen this vehicle to actually do some of that. In changing the form, obviously we recognize that we are changing some of the requirements that are incumbent on you, and there are a couple of things I would say about that. First of all, in relation to this document that you see on the screen, I want to point one thing out. If you come down here onto page 2, what this chart here shows is the timeline of the transition between this old form and this new form. And as I mentioned, it will happen incrementally over several years. What this chart is saying, because it may not be self-evident, is that in the first 2 rows here, you have mentioned the UCS 195 sections 5 through 6 and the UCS 195 sections 1 through 4. The UCS 195 is a 6-section form, and what you can see in the column labeled 2019 there is that the UCS 195 form remains unchanged. This is very important. The reporting requirement, as will happen next year in April, is the same as it has always been. There will be no change in the reporting requirement this year. That's because in 2019, when you're filling out that form, you will be reporting on your 2018 data, and 2018 is already finished, so it would be quite unreasonable to ask you to start submitting data in a new format in a few months when you haven't had time to start recording what needs to be recorded. So in 2019, no change, no new data, no nothing. In 2020, however, what you can see here is that sections 5 and 6 of the UCS 195 form go away, and they are replaced by part 1 of the new form being the ILS 195. Sections 5 and 6 of the UCS 195 concern the staffing and expenditures of providers of mandated representation. Part 1 of the new form also concerns staffing and expenditures of providers of mandated representation, but it asks the questions in slightly new and different ways. And that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to focus on those Part 1 questions because those are the ones that are coming the soonest. And although 2020 might seem like quite a long way in the future, when you're reporting in 2020, you will of course be reporting on data collected in the year 2019, and therefore, and 2019 starts in just a couple of weeks. So the implication is that you may need to start recording data to be submitted all the way in 2020, beginning in January. So that's why we wanted to get this training done as soon as we possibly could. Parts 2 and 3 of the form you will see from the same chart coming in the years 2021 and 2022 respectively. We will not be focusing on those today. Part 2 principally concerns caseload data collection. Part 3 principally concerns case outcome data collection, what actually happens to clients. And we will be doing training on those. We will be doing a Part 2 training at some point in the summer of next year and Part 3 at some point in the future after that. But today, we are only focusing on Part 1, which has to do with the staffing and expenditures of your provider. I'm referring to my notes because I know there are a couple of things I need to say before I stop for questions about all of this. One thing by way of explanation for what the changes to the forms actually represent. The changes, if anybody's unfamiliar with what the UCS 195 is, do get in touch with us about that. There are always, every year, somebody is new to the job and has never heard of this form before. I trust that most people on this call actually do know what it is. One thing that you will notice about the changes is that they do, in some ways, represent more granular and nuanced and in the weeds kinds of breakdowns of the numbers that have been required to be submitted before. To some extent, therefore, this new form does represent a more complicated kind of data request than the old form did. I want to say something a little bit about that. Two things, really. The first is that all of the information that we're requesting in this new form, as complicated as it may at times seem, is being requested because we need it. It's not being requested because it's academically interesting or because we're curious. It's being requested because, as I said, the mandate has fallen upon us to distribute money to improve provision of mandated representation. And unless we have data that shows that caseloads are coming down, that the services are being provided, and that kind of thing, we are going to jeopardize our ability to do this at all. So when we request these data, we request them because we need them. Further, in regards to that, you can also find on our website this document here called Background and Purpose. This really lays out a lot of the thinking behind the revisions of the new form in the terms that I just put forth, of having to do with improving, with demonstrating the necessary improvements of the services that we're mandated to show. If you come down a little bit in this document, that's on around page 3 or 4, what happens in this part of the document is we go through every question of the form and we explain why we're asking for the data that we're asking for. And we also explain how we will use those data to show that the progress is being made that we need to show. So if at any point you get into the form, you wonder why data are being requested, and you wonder what it is that we think we might be doing with it, refer to this document and it will hopefully provide some kind of information and orientation on that point. The second thing I would say, having said first that we're only asking for the information that we need, and I would add that if at any point we had choices between asking things in a more complicated or a less complicated way, thank you. We did always try and ask in the least complicated way possible. That's not to say that the form is not at points complicated. It is, but that's why we're here today. The second point to make is that under the legislation and our authority to distribute funds to assist with the statewide implementation of Pharrell hiring reforms, there is contemplation that counties and providers may wish to use some of the funding specifically for data upgrades. Excuse me. Obviously, we expect, and it's often true, that most of the funding that people get, they use for attorneys or other things to provide services to clients. But when we made our budget allocations, we specifically made allocations for data officers, which Gis will talk about a little bit later. There's also implied consideration in there for things like computers and case management systems if they happen to be needed. I'm speaking only in abstract terms now, because if you wanted to spend the money in that way, what you would have to do as a county is approach Joanne McCree on our team and devise with them a plan to actually spend the money. So this isn't by way of a promise or really even any specific example. It's simply to say that in the event that providing these data become difficult or require you to upgrade something in some way, it is an appropriate use of the statewide expansion money to support data infrastructure development in order that this reporting can be done. So that's about as much as I'll say about the increasing complexity of the data reporting. A couple of other things before I break. Number one, if you're a Hurrell-Herring County, that's Onondaga, Ontario, Schuyler, Suffolk, or Washington, that is to say, if you were a defendant in the original lawsuit, these data requirements strictly do not apply to you. Those Hurrell-Herring counties already have very large data requirements imposed upon them, much more onerous than this, in fact, and so we're not adding this to their burden. After the settlement is concluded, this will be added to the burden of those counties, and they will continue to be responsible for filing the UCS 195 in the meantime. However, we also know that some people in the Hurrell-Harran counties actually want to learn about this form and begin filling it out, and they are most welcome to do that. It is not required. For the other 52 counties in New York City providers, it is required. And then the last thing that I wanted to say, because this has come up a few times, is that we are not going to require public defenders or legal aid society attorneys to start tracking their time. There's been some concern that we may start asking all the defenders in the state to record their time in 5-minute increments and be able to report what they did for every client. That's not what we're doing. This is something our executive director has been very explicit about. Obviously, if you're in an assigned counsel system, people are reporting and recording their time anyway. That's a different thing. Public defenders and legal aid society attorneys, we understand, don't do that typically, and we won't be asking for it here. So in case that was on anybody's mind, please put it out of it. That's not what we'll be requiring here. So I'm going to break now. If anybody has questions about this timeline over the next few years about how the old form will progressively be replaced with a new form and why we're doing what we're doing, please do speak now. I'll give you a moment, and I'll also check my chat box here. Okay, hearing nothing, and thank you for your continued attention. We did end up muting everybody, by the way, to cut down on the background noise. If you do wish to speak, you should be able to see on your computer screen a way to unmute yourself and simply speak up. But I don't see anything in the chat box. So we'll move on to item 2 here, and we will start to look at the form. What we're going to do with the form, I'm going to come back to our spreadsheet, and here's the link here. This is to the demonstration version of the form. I'm going to click on that, and we're going to go through it in 3 stages. The first is really dealing with the preliminaries of the form, the instructions, the part where we type in our name, that kind of thing. The second is to do with the first really substantive part of the form that's asking about personnel on staff. And then the last part of the form deals with other than personnel services. So those are our 3 chunks, and we'll be breaking after each one for questions. So clicking on our demonstration form here, we'll start by walking through the instructions. The first thing I draw your attention to is the top line here in gray that notes that the form was recently revised. This form is still under revision. We're confident training you from it because it's very close to being finalized. We did put it out for comment to defenders in November. We got some comments back. We made some revisions from those. In the course of these trainings, we have had a few questions where we haven't been able to answer them satisfactorily, and we've realized that our definitions need refining at points. So as a result, there are a few nuances that are going to be adjusted before this form goes final on December 31st. We will, at the time the form goes final, also produce a frequently asked questions sheet which will indicate any of the final changes that have been made, which would mean that the form that we're going to work on today is slightly different to that form. However, as I say, it's really pretty close to being final, and with the exception of a few niggles here and there. Moving down into the general instructions, the first paragraph here simply deals with the timeline over the next few years and the fact that this form is going to replace the old UCS 195 form. So we've already covered that, and we won't go over it again. The second paragraph here, 3 things I want to draw to your attention. The first is that it mentions instruction definitions links. As we go through the survey, through the form, you will see these. Next to most questions, there is a link that says instructions and definitions, and you can click on it, and in the event that there's a word in the question that is unclear, or the purpose of the question is unclear or anything like that, inside those, a text box will pop up and will show you definitions and further instructions for the question. So those are important. We shall click on several as we go through. Second, there's a link here to additional resources. That link, in fact, takes you back to the website that we were just at a moment ago. So that's there as well. And third in this paragraph, the save answers and continue later function. I know that sometimes it's infuriating if you're filling out a form online and you walk away and you come back and your computer's gone to sleep and you wake it up and all the data are gone. In this form, you can avoid that by clicking Save Answers and Continue. These Save Answers and Continue links appear at the bottom of every page. I'll show you this is the one on this page. I won't click on it because if I did, I would be thrown out of the survey, although we will put a video of somebody clicking on it on our website later so you can see how it works, but it's very simple. You click on it, it asks you for your email, it then emails you a link. That link will take you back to the survey right where you left off with all of your data still there. So that's an important feature to avoid the frustration of having to enter everything all at once and then have it disappear in front of you. You can avoid it by doing that. Next paragraph of the opening instructions here. This is a lengthy and we hope exhaustive definition of the word provider. This may seem excessive, but it's actually very important. The reason is this form, the ILS 195, and indeed the ETS 195, is required to be filled out by every provider of indigent legal services. Most places, that's not a confusing idea. The provider is a public defender office, the provider is an assigned counsel system, whatever it may be. In some places, it can be a bit confusing what's a provider and how is it separate from other providers. For example, the one situation that we come across quite frequently is that public defender offices have within them an administrator, a member of the administrative staff whose job it is to actually run the assigned counsel panel wheel and deal with the assignments and the vouchers. Administratively in that county, those two systems, the public defender and the assigned counsel system, may be regarded as one administrative unit and may be treated as one provider. For our purposes, it's very important to have those separate. It's very important to have them separate from a data perspective because we often treat the assigned counsel data differently to the way that we do treat institutional provider data. Institutional providers meaning public defenders or legal aid societies. If you're in that situation in your county, what this definition tells you is that you would need to submit this form twice. You would need to submit one for the public defender part of your operation, which we regard as a separate provider, and one for the assigned counsel part of your operation, which we regard as separate in its own right. So that's not a terribly prevalent problem, but it does happen some places. Further, this definition also goes into programs that are cross-county regional. It also deals with New York City, which is different again. So it's worth reviewing because this paragraph is really telling you who's responsible for filing this thing. And it may be that if you're in one of these situations, it turns out you have to file two or something like that. So that's worth reviewing. It's not only an academic issue. Next, this paragraph simply makes clear the due date and is relatively self-explanatory. The form is always due in April. Importantly, the reference period for the form's questions is January 1st to December 31st. So whenever the form says how many cases do you have or how much did you spend or whatever, it's referring to that calendar year. It's not referring to your contract year and it's not referring to your budget year. It is referring to the calendar year and it's due the following April. The rest of this opening instructions portion is not terribly relevant to us today. This paragraph actually refers to definitions for counting cases, which I commend to your attention because we have published them and they are linked right there. If, however, counting cases is a Part 2 and Part 3 issue in our form, and today we are focused only on Part 1, and so therefore we don't need to talk about definitions of counting cases today. So those are our opening instructions, and we click Next. Now we have a series of, as I said, administrative preliminary questions to the form, so we'll fill those out quickly, and then we'll break for questions and see if everybody's still with us. First, they want to know who we are. I shall just fill this out very quickly indeed, much less carefully than you would, so that we can keep moving. I will point out up here, this is our first instructions and definitions link that I mentioned earlier. In this case, this instructions and definitions link is sitting right underneath the word provider, and if we click on it, it pops up this screen which shows us the definition of the word provider. This definition is the same definition that appeared on the introductory set of instructions that we already went over, but I wanted to pop it up just to show you how that works. We keep going, and that's how, then please don't write to that email address, it won't work. That gets us past the first screen. Two more, I think, opening administrative questions here. The first is, are we an institutional provider or an assigned counsel system? This is important because this is setting up what we call a skip pattern. Later in the form, there are some questions that we only ask of assigned counsel programs, and there are some questions that we only ask of institutional providers. And so depending on what you click here, you'll get different things. In part one, there is a question that we only ask of assigned counsel providers. It has to do with how many people are on the panel. And so I'm going to say we're assigned counsel, so that way we're going to see all the questions. If we clicked institutional provider, we wouldn't see that question. Institutional providers are, as I said, public defenders, legal aid societies, basically anybody with attorneys on staff. Assigned counsel providers, attorneys are paid by the hour. However, if that informal definition is not enough for you, you can click again on instructions and definitions, and it will pop up the definitions for you. I see actually that my screen has frozen, so I can see the definitions while you can't. This does happen from time to time. I'm quite comfortable with it. We've had a few of these little technical glitches. Generally, your screen catches up with mine in 10 or 20 seconds or so. Whenever it does, there it goes. You will be able to see the institutional providers and assigned counsel definitions down at the bottom here. Okay, so we've elected that we're assigned counsel. We shall click next. This is the last opening administrative question, and it seems a bit obscure, so I shall explain it. The question is this provider notified of all new cases at the time of opening? What this question is getting at is that in some places, with certain assigned counsel situations particularly, it is possible for judges to make assignments to attorneys, and neither the judge nor the attorney informs the assigned counsel administrator that the assignment's been made. So, in other words, the case has been opened, but the assigned counsel administrator doesn't know about it. In fact, the assigned counsel administrator in some places only knows about that case when the attorney submits a bill at the end for their services. And so they only actually know about the case after it's already closed. The problem with that from the perspective of this form is that later on there is a question about how many cases a provider opened last year. And if you're a type of provider where you don't know if cases have been opened when they've been opened, then we need to ask you a different question at that point about the new cases. However, that's a relatively uncommon situation. Most public defender offices are sufficiently kind of consolidated that when an assistant PD is assigned to a case, then the people at the center know about it. And indeed, most assigned counsel programs are like that too. So we're going to say that we're in that more typical situation today. So we do know when cases open at the time that they open. So now I shall click next, and it brings us to this informational screen that tells us we're about to really embark on the substance of part one. So at this point, I'm going to take a little pause, and if anybody wishes to speak and ask a question, unmute yourself and go ahead and do that. I'll give you a moment. I'm also checking my chat box here. As before, do remember to send messages to everyone so that we can see them. I don't see any at the moment. Okay, Thank you very much. So we shall move on to the next part. Now we're going to get into the real substance of the questions where we're going to have to start actually entering data. And there are two parts to this. The first part is mostly about what is called personal services, so that's people, staff, and the other part is called other than personal services, which we'll get to later. Okay. Right, so by way of a brief overview, I could now click next and show you the first question, but I'm not going to do that for reasons I'll explain. Roughly the next 5 questions of the form concern the number of people who work in your provider mandated representation. It asks for that information in a couple of different ways. It asks for the number of people, but then it asks for the number of full-time equivalent people, which is where you have to express anybody who's part-time, you express them as a decimal, like they're a 0.5 or 50%. It then asks for how many of those people are working on criminal cases and how many are working on family cases, and if they're split, how are they split? It also asks for the total amount that those people are paid, both salaries and benefits. All of that information, therefore, you could simply fill it out, but it has to be broken out in so many different ways. But we've actually created a tool that we think will make it easier to figure out the answers to the questions that the form is asking. So instead of clicking next, I'm now going to go over to that tool. I'm going to show you how to use it, and then we'll come back to the form and we'll put the answers in from what the tool has given us. So, and at that point, we'll take a break in case anybody's got totally lost. So I'm going to switch over to this tool. Actually, I should first show you where to get it. Once again, if you come to our website over here, it's referred to as the ILS Employee Statistics Worksheet, and it's linked right there. It's an Excel sheet, and there's a set of instructions that come right underneath it. So you can click on it and download it. I already have it open here. What this worksheet is going to require us to do is write in information about every employee in your office. Clarify what I mean by office in a moment. It's then going to ask us certain information about every employee. It's going to ask us, are they full-time or part-time? If they're part-time, what percentage are they? If they have a mix of criminal and family practice, then what's the mix there? How much do they get paid, and so on and so forth. And from all of that information, this spreadsheet is going to be able to compute the actual numbers that we need to put into the form. And we hope this is simpler. To be clear, you're not required to use this spreadsheet. This is just a tool. It's not part of the form. It's not something you need to submit to us. It is a way of generating the answers that go into the form that we hope will be a little bit easier. I'm sure I was about to say something and I lost my train of thought. I will say this form is, this tool was developed by me in Excel. I have given it to people who've been able to break it. If you type some nonsense numbers into here, it will generate nonsense for you. So it's not completely foolproof. I'll work through it very carefully and slowly. If you do it the same way that I do, it will work. But, you know, no guarantees. It's certainly possible to break it if you want. So, yeah. What we're going to do then is the average public defender office in upstate New York has 5 attorneys in it. And so I'm going to pretend that we are a 5-attorney office, and we are going to go ahead and start filling out information about our employees on this sheet, and then we'll go back to the form and put the information in there. I should emphasize before I start this, or I should say before I start this, if you're an assigned counsel system, what we are asking for here are the number of employees who are actually involved in the administration of the system. In a lot of places, that's only one person, an assigned counsel administrator. Sometimes they have other supports as well. What we are not asking for here is a complete list of your panelists and all your panel lawyers. There are questions later in the form about those people. There is a question about how much they're paid on their vouchers and that kind of thing. But the concern here right now, if you're in a assigned counsel system, is who works in the administration of the system. If you're a public defender office or legal aid society, the question is, who's your staff lawyers? So that's what we're going for here. As I said, average provider upstate is a 5-lawyer office, so that's what we will go with. So we'll call our attorneys Anthea, Betty, Betty, Cyril, I'm going to have to not be very precise about my spelling, aren't I? Daryl and Edward. Okay, so 5 lawyers entered in who work in this office. But then the next question we have to answer is, are they full-time or part-time? You can drop this down here. I'm going to say that we've got 3 full-timers, but also 2 part-timers here in the form of Daryl and Edward. Now, the moment that we say that they're part-time, you can see these cells here turn blue. That's because the tool is asking us to put a number in there that represents the percentage of full-time that these people actually work. Most part-timers have some kind of contract that says a number of hours or a percentage of full-time or something like that they have to work, and so you would pull that from there. So we'll say that Daryl is a 70% employee and Edward is a 50% employee. What we can see, and we'll just work through this in our heads now because we'll be able to see that the spreadsheet has done this work for us later. So we have 5 employees on the attorney side, but 3 part-time, with Daryl makes 3.7 and with Edward makes 4.2 full-time equivalent employees. And just put that number in your head because when we get to the readout at the end of this, you will be able to see that numbers hopefully come out correct. So continuing with our attorney employees, the spreadsheet also wants to know what proportion of time is this person working on criminal representation. Slightly trickier, less familiar question is, as I made clear earlier, the Harrell hiring expansion, and as most people know, is focused on criminal representation and not focused at all on family court representation. In some providers, in some larger providers in particular, there may be a group of attorneys who only work on criminal representation, a group who only work on family, or some providers only do one or the other. But in small to medium offices like this one, it's quite common that the attorneys on staff are doing both, that they are all doing some kind of mixed practice. Now, I said earlier that we're not going to require attorneys to track their time, and we're not. But what we do need here is some kind of good faith estimate about the proportion of each attorney's time that they're spending on criminal cases as opposed to family court parent representation cases. So in the case of Anthea, maybe she is doing about half of her time on criminal cases, so we put her in as a 50. Betty perhaps only does criminal cases, so she's an easy 100. Cyril perhaps mostly does family court representation, is occasionally in criminal court cases, so we'll put him as a 20. 20% of his practice is in criminal court. Daryl is only a 0.7 employee, so the question is, how much of that 70% is criminal? Let's say he only does criminal cases as well, so for him, it's 100. In other words, 100% of this 70% employee is on criminal cases. Edward is a 50% part-time employee. Let's say he only spends half of his time on criminal cases and the other half on family court cases. So in his case, 50% of 50%, really just 0.25 of a full-time employee on the criminal side from Edward. Moving along, we'll try and finish this spreadsheet for the attorney employees, then we're going to move to the non-attorney employees, then we'll see what the readout is and we'll pause for questions. The next question is, did this attorney supervise others? It's a fairly small office, so we shall say that while Anthea supervised others, the other attorneys didn't. And this is a good opportunity actually for me to segue across into our glossary, because already you will have noticed we're using terms like supervise, which may not mean the same thing to everybody. For that reason, we've already highlighted that as you're doing the form, there are instructions and definitions. Anytime there's a word that perhaps needs clarifying, you can click on those. But we also have on our website, this glossary is about the sixth thing down, seventh on the list there. This glossary actually contains all of the instructions and definitions of the form, just consolidated. And if you click on it, you can pull this document up here. And if, for example, you're curious about the definition of the word supervise, you can quickly skip to that definition, which is here. So I stress that just because as you're working through this form and you start to see terms and you wonder what exactly we mean by them, another resource available to you is that glossary, which just replicates the definitions that are already in the form, but in one document. And you can figure out what applies to you and what to enter. Finally, last important question for our attorneys here is how much did they cost, both in terms of salary and fringe benefits? What this question is getting at here in New York budget parlance is personal services expenditures. Personal services expenditures are the cost of hiring or retaining the services of an individual, including not only their salary, but all of the other stuff you have to pay for them as well, their retirement, their fringe, their health insurance and everything, assuming that you pay it. I mean, not everywhere does provide these things, of course. And again, personal services, by the way, and all of these terms are also defined in the glossary. So in as much as I'm providing abbreviated and informal definitions now, do refer back to those if they're unclear. So ANSIA, for example, a full-time supervising attorney may take home $100,000, but when fringe and everything is accounted for, perhaps she actually costs $150,000. Betty, a non-supervisor, also full-time though, perhaps takes home 80, which after fringe and everything comes to 120. Cyril, same attorney, same kind of profile, same job, also pulling down 120. Daryl is a 0.7 attorney, so maybe he's not making 80, he's making about 60. And then after we add in fringe for him, he comes in at 75 or something like that. No significance to these numbers, I'm just making them up, but I do want to illustrate the salary plus benefit thing, just to reiterate it repeatedly. Edward is only a 50% part-timer, so he's presumably making about 40, but after fringe and everything, he's pulling down 60. That, in effect, is our attempt to capture the personal services cost of hiring these particular attorneys. Now, we have 5 attorneys, but the form is going to ask us about our non-attorney staff as well, so I'm going to now enter in information for the non-attorney staff. And then we will get to the point where we got some numbers that we can put into the form, and I shall pause for questions. We're a small office, so I'm just going to say we've got 2 non-attorney staff. We shall say we have Freya and Gilbert. Again, first question here is familiar. Is this person full-time or part-time? Let's say that Freya is full-time and Gilbert is part-time. This question, though, we didn't get for the attorneys. This question is asking us to classify what kind of person this is. And if you drop down the menu here, there are 3 options. Freya could be an investigator, she could be a social worker, or she could be something else. She could be an administrator or something like that. We need to say what kind of person Freya is, because in the form, it's going to actually ask us how many investigators do you have, how many social workers do you have, and how many of everything else do you have. Again, those terms, if you go across to our glossary, I'll even show it to you just for curiosity's sake. If you are curious about exactly how we define social worker, for example, you can come to this definition right here, which clarifies exactly what we mean when we count social workers. social worker definition is particularly interesting because it counts not only people who have a Master's of Social Work degree, but it also counts people whose primary role is social work type work, things like doing sentencing, advocacy, and mitigation investigation, and that kind of thing. So you'll decide how to classify these people. We can perhaps say that Freya is a social worker. Gilbert, on the other hand, I'm assuming is our office administrator, so we'll say he is an other. Gilbert's part-time, so we need to say what percentage of part-time he is. We'll say 80 because it seems like a pretty big job for one administrator. And then another familiar question with Freya, our social worker, the question is, how much of her time is she spending on family court cases and how much time she's spending on criminal court cases? Same question as before. Perhaps as a social worker, she's actually family court focused. So we'll say she's only doing about 30% of her time on the criminal court side. Gilbert is just an administrator, but nevertheless, because Harrell Haring has this focus on criminal, we need to establish some kind of good faith estimate of about how much time he is spending on criminal work as opposed to family court related support administrative of work. And we'll say he's about 50-50 in terms of the 80% that he is contributing. Finally, moving towards the end of this section, how much is our social worker making? She's full-time. Perhaps she's taking home 65, but again, after fringe and everything, it comes to 85. Gilbert is an 80% employee. That means we're not putting his full-time equivalent salary in, we're putting in what he actually costs. So as an 80% administrator, perhaps he's only taking home 38,000, and then with fringe it comes to 52, something like that. Okay, so now what we've done is we've put in information for 7 employees, 5 attorneys, 2 non-attorneys. And if we click on our last tab here, what we get is a table which lays out a bunch of numbers, and these numbers are the answers to about the first 5 questions that the form is going to ask. For example, the first question that the form is going to ask is, how many employees did you have in your office? It's going to be laid out exactly like this. It's going to ask for attorneys, investigators, social workers, and other, and then there's going to be a total column. And so you'll be able to transfer the numbers right from here, right into that form. So there's a lot here, but what I'm not going to go through it in detail. What we're going to do in a moment is we're going to go back to the form. We're going to start to put these numbers in, and we'll go through it in detail then. Before I do that, because we just went through a long and in-the-weeds process of entering information, I want to pause, and if you have any questions, unmute yourself and please speak up now. Okay, I don't see any in the chat box either. Thank you. We got one quite good question from Althea. What did it mean employees on July 1st? It's quite true. I'm trying to remember if this actually came on our screen during this presentation yet, but it is true that the exact question that the form asks is, how many employees did you have in your provider on July 1st of last year? So when you are answering it in the year 2020, the question is, how many employees did you have on staff in your provider on July 1st of 2019? The reason we ask about a specific day is because it's the simplest way to ask about how many employees you had through the year. A more complicated way to ask this question would be to ask, at several points in the year, how many employees did you have? How did people come and go? Is there a way for you to tell us what percentage of the year that they were there, in order for us to get an impression across the whole year of really exactly how many employees you had going on? It's much simpler if we simply choose a day on which to take a snapshot. Again, we could have gone more complicated with this. We could have asked you to report it every month or something like that, because what we recognize is July 1st might not actually be a typical day. It might be that you had a bunch of open positions that day or something like that. And we'll show you later in the form where if the day is not a typical day, you can actually tell us about how July 1st is not really a good metric. But generally, for our purposes, it works very well. And it's simplest for you, we think, if we just say, tell us how many employees you had on a specific day. It didn't have to be July 1st. That July 1st just happens to be right in the middle of the year, so that's what we went for. Yes, we'll see in a moment that that is exactly the question that is asked, and it was an arbitrary choice. So I hope that it was an arbitrary choice and it was the simplest choice. So I hope that clarifies why we did that. So that question actually does allow me to segue back into going to the form. So I think that's what I'll do here. You can see no other questions right now. So to review and reiterate, we've entered in information about 7 different employees, presumably who were employed on July 1st of last year, and we've now got this readout of a bunch of information that you may not have absorbed yet, but we're going to go through the first few questions of the form, and the particular utility of these different pieces of information I hope will be made clear. This is where we left off at the form. This is an informational page. It's just telling you what's about to happen. There's no question to be answered here, so we'll keep going. Now, the first really substantive question, which indeed evokes this July 1st date. How many individuals were on staff at this provider on July 1st of last year in the following categories? And as you can see, the categories laid out here in the question are the same ones as appear on that on our tool, on our spreadsheet. It wants us to tell it how many attorneys, investigators, social workers, and other staff. If we go back to our spreadsheet, you can see this line right here, 5, 0, 1, and 1 adding up to 7. And so we simply go back to our spreadsheet here and add these numbers in. And the website is computing this number 7 over here, so we can confirm that that's correct. That's what we intended to have in there. So that first question is pretty easy. Hopefully, you could have gone around the office and done a head count, and it would have been the same result. But as you'll see, it gets a little bit more complicated in a moment. So we go next. This next question is how many attorneys on staff supervise the work of others? We just had 1 supervising attorney in our medium-sized office, so that's fairly simple. I will point out that right here, that number is represented. In the event that you had a lot of supervising attorneys, it was harder to count them. The spreadsheet would do that for you. We'll go on to next. Now, this question is how many hours is a full-time employee required to work in this provider? I put in 37.5 because that's what I'm required to work. Some places it's 35, some places it's 40. We'll say 40. The reason we ask this question is because the very next question after this is going to ask how many full-time equivalent employees do you have? And we can only understand that information in the context of this information. So this is how many hours you're required to work every week. And as promised, here's the next question. How many full-time equivalent staff were employed by this provider on July 1st of last year? As you remember, we had a total of 5 employees, and we did the math in our head, but it was only 4.2 full-time equivalent attorneys. And hopefully, if we go to our spreadsheet here and we look at this line, you can see it has come out just so. So under FTE staff, attorneys, we have 4.2 just there. 0 investigators, of course, a full-time social worker, and a 0.8 administrator, all adding up to precisely 6 full-time equivalent employees. So that's the answer to this question. And if I can memorize those numbers, I'll just put them in now, 4.2, 1, and 0.8. Oh, that's in the wrong place. I will actually show you something here. If I leave this blank, and I try to proceed, I will receive an error message. I need to fill out all of the cells for this to go through. So I don't have any investigators. I put the 0 there. The total adds up to 6, which confirms I did the math right. And hopefully this will be accepted this time. Okay, that was all right. Now, this question looks a little bit more intimidating, but actually our previous work with the spreadsheet will help us with it. What this question is asking is for us to take the full-time employees, the attorneys, the investigators, the social workers, and the others, and break them down in terms of how much time they spend on criminal court cases and how much time they spend on family court parent representation. And that's why the spreadsheet asks us for every one of those, what's the percentage of this person's time on one side or the other. The way this is formatted is it has pulled forward the answers that I gave in the previous question into this row here, the total row. These numbers are the numbers that I just put in a moment ago in the previous question. I can't change those now. At least I can't change them here. If I went back, I could change them. But these numbers have just been pulled from the previous question and they are set there. And what the form is asking us to do is break down this 4.2 attorneys, for example, into how many FTEs on the criminal side, how many FTEs on the family side, and after we put those numbers in, the website's actually going to check our math and make sure that we got the math right. Thankfully, our spreadsheet has actually provided this breakdown for us because it's taken all of that information that we put in about the proportion of time that a person was spending on one side or the other, and it's added it all up here so that all the numbers ought to work. So our only job now is to enter this into the form itself. So our attorneys are a split of 2.65 to 1.55. We don't have any investigators. Our social worker goes 0.3 to 0.7, and our other guy is even. Okay. And I'm actually also now going to demonstrate to you what happens if I make a mistake in my math. So whereas 0.3 and 0.7 do add up to 1, 0.4 and 0.5 do not add up to 0.8. If I try and put that number in, it gives me this error message, and it asks me to try again. If I put the 0.4 in there, hopefully now the math is actually going to add up, and if I click next, it'll be accepted, as indeed it was. So this is our last question before we take another break. The question here is, what were the total expenditures in this provider on personal services? And you'll remember that in our spreadsheet, we were asked to put in the total amount that it costs for every employee to pay them not only their salary or wages, but also any benefits on top of that. And that is what personal services expenditures are. If there's any lack of clarity about that, of course, you have your instructions and definitions here. This defines in much more exhaustive detail what personal services expenditures are, and of course you can refer to the glossary that I showed you earlier. But essentially, it's the total cost of actually retaining employees in terms of benefits and wages. We already put it into our spreadsheet, and the totals are reading out down here. You can see that our attorneys are paid a total of $525,000. We don't have any investigators. The social workers making it 85, and our others are 52, and it adds up to 62. Again, these are meaningless numbers. I'm just making them up. So 525. Our investors, I've already forgotten. 0, 85, and 52. 0, 85,000, and 52. And we can see over here that the website's added up, and the total is 662,000. And so that is all set. So we have one other kind of substantive piece to get onto, which is so-called other than personal services. But I want to take a break now and see if we have any questions, and if anybody has any, please do type away or speak up. I'll just give you a moment. Okay, not hearing or seeing any at the moment. So, to review, we used our spreadsheet to create information about how many employees we had, to break them down into FTEs, to break them into criminal and family side, to figure out how much they were being paid in total. across last year. We're now done with our spreadsheet. It cannot help us anymore, but we do have a couple of other questions still to get to. There are really two more substantive questions that require some effort, and then we will be kind of on the home straight as far as part one of this form is concerned, and as far as our discussion today is concerned. So, the remaining major issue is so-called other than personal services. In, again, New York parlance, as I understand it, and this is somewhat new to me, budgets for agencies are divided into personal services, which has to do with the benefits and wages of employees. We've already dealt with that. And other than personal services. Other than personal services can be further subdivided into contractual expenditures with people and other stuff. Other stuff like that creates the remainder of the cost of running your agency, which might be your heating bill, your photocopying bill, your travel, your mileage, and all of that kind of thing. All of those things, the contractual side, and then the heating and the mail and all of that, those are other than personal services because they are not salaries and benefits to employees. That's what this question is all about. It asks that you please report the total expenditures on other than personal services last year. There are several categories going on here, but I want them to break them down just into two important groups. The first group here is the first 5 columns. I'm highlighting, but I think that may make it more difficult to read, so I'll stop. The first 5 columns here, did I say 4? The first 5 columns here refer to people who could be contractors with you. Attorneys, investigators, social workers, expert witnesses, and other people. Now, this is important. If you're an assigned counsel program, this is where all of your expenditures on vouchers goes. So if you spent $1.5 million on attorneys last year for their services through your assigned counsel voucher system, those expenditures are reported here. If you're a public defender or a legal aid society and all of your attorneys are on staff and you already reported them as personal services, you probably would have a 0 here. But that's what those expenditures are for. Second, investigators. Again, if you're an assigned counsel program, you may make vouchers, you may cut checks occasionally to investigators for their services. Here, you put the number that you pay to those people right here. Also, I do know that some public defender offices don't have investigators on staff. Instead, they will contract with investigators. And so if you have any payments of those kinds, even if you are a public defender office, this is where those are reported also. If you contract with any social workers, perhaps to do some sentencing advocacy or mitigation work, they can go right here. Expert witnesses, if you paid any of those, can go right here. Do note throughout that if you're confused about any definition, for example, of an expert witness, click on your instructions and definitions as I just did, and you'll actually find a definition right down here for an expert witnesses. Interestingly, for the expert witnesses, we do also count expenditures even if the person didn't actually testify as a witness but was only consulted. And so, on matters like that, you'll hopefully find clarity about what you should be counting where in the instructions and definitions links. If anything remains unclear, then get in touch with us, because as we've discovered in the last few days, we haven't thought of absolutely everything. And then contracts with other persons. We had somebody on a training the other day who has contractual expenditures for process servers. So they would be an example of an other person. So again, the first 5 columns here are contractual expenditures with people for stuff that they did. If you're an assigned counsel system, this is where almost all of your money that's going out to your panel is actually going to be reported. If you're a public defender office or a legal aid society, you still might have some, but you might not. And then we come over to all other OTPS. So far we dealt with contractual expenditures for people. Now we're dealing with all other OTPS. All other OTPS is the catch-all category for every other kind of expenditure that you have. It's the kind of thing that we already mentioned, things like heating bills. But again, if we go to our instructions and definitions and we go all the way down to the bottom here, you can find a long list here for what these actually can include. Briefly, supplies, equipment, rent, training, mileage, licensing, books, research, utilities, and chargebacks. Chargebacks don't happen in every county, but in some places they do. A chargeback is where a county agency is given office space to exist in by its county, but is then charged for the use of the office space, whether it be for the security or the heating of it or the maintenance of it. Some portion of the building maintenance is charged against that office's budget, and it becomes part of the operating expenditures of the office. And in that case, a chargeback is an example of an OTPS cost, which would be therefore reported right here, along with your photocopying bill and everything else. So we'll say, again, these numbers are meaningless, but we'll say that we had 100,000 in those. And again, the website's adding everything up. And so our other than personal services expenditures were $1.645 million for our provider last year. Okay, now there's just one more big question for which you need to brace yourself, because much like when we had our full-time equivalent people and it asked us to break out those people into criminal and family court work, so it is here. When we are describing, if we're an assigned counsel program, that we have paid investigators $25,000 last year, that's all very well, but we also want to know how much of that money went to investigators in criminal cases and how much went to investigators in family court cases. And this is one of the places where it may be important for you to realize that this breakout is going to be required in 2020, because if there's something about your billing system right now that's not going to allow you to break out or categorize those payments, then that's something that you want to be thinking about as we head into the new year. So it's going to be the same kind of situation as before. As we click into this question, it's going to pull forward the numbers that I just put into the previous question. And I can't change these here. I would have to go back to the other question to change them. And it's asking us for these 5 categories of contractor to break out whether the expenditures were in the criminal side or the family side. Importantly, over here, this all other category that dealt with your heating bill and things like that, we don't ask you to break that out into how much heating bill went onto your criminal representation, how much heating bill went onto your family court representation. We have no use for that information, and anyway, we can't think of any way that you could even report it. So, attorneys, we paid them $1.5 million last year. Let's say that 900 of that was on the criminal side and 600 on the family court side. In a moment, when we click next, the website's going to check our math to see if we got this right. Investigators, that was mostly criminal, let's say, 18 over here, 7 over here. Again, hopefully your billing system allows you to know which of these contractors will pay for which kind of case. Social workers, they helped us out with a bit of, I can't do the math on that, a bit of advocacy over here, but much more over here. Expert witnesses, we had somebody to testify over here and a little bit less over here, and so on. Again, the numbers in the top 2 rows need to sum to the number in the bottom row. These columns over here, we don't have to break those out at all, but for these contractors we do. We need to know what kind of cases they were actually working on, such that we can now say that how much was expended for this kind of thing on the criminal side and how much was expended on the family court side. So I've done all my math right. This should be the last really substantial question. So I'll click next and hopefully it'll be accepted. Yes, okay, we're good. It doesn't always work that easily. I often make mistakes. Okay, I said we're on the home straight now, and we really are. So I'm going to run to the end of the home straight and take you through these last few questions, which are really just mopping up, and then we will pause for questions again in case anything remains unclear. What's going on this page is that down here, the website is computing the total amount of expenditures that we've reported. This is adding up all of our personal services expenditures with all of our other than personal services expenditures to come up with this 2,310,500 number. That is the total expenditures for our provider. Hopefully, by adding up personal and other than personal, we have caught everything. However, if there's something that for some reason did not fall into either of those categories, you have an opportunity up here to just type in an amount that is spending that didn't fall into either of those categories. As you type it in, the number down here is automatically updated, and provided we think that that total is accurate and we're happy with it, we can click next to move on. If we don't think we're happy with it and we're not sure that it's accurate, we can't change it here. We have to go back to the previous, using our back button, we have to go back to the previous questions, change the number that we entered for those, and in order that this number can then be automatically updated. I'm just having a moment now again where my screen is freezing. Oh no, I'm back. Yes, this is automatically calculated, can't change it here, but if it doesn't look right, go back and change the numbers that are underlying it in order to change this. If you see it now and you say, yes, that does seem right, then we can say next and move along. This is the question that I referred to earlier that is only asked of assigned counsel programs. The question is, how many attorneys, were paid over the past year for work in criminal and family court cases respectively? This question is not therefore asking how many people do you have on your panel, it's asking how many people you actually paid, how many attorneys you actually paid. So if you have a 15-person panel on the criminal side, but only 12 of them accepted payments last year, and a 15-person panel on the family court side, and only 8 of them accepted payments, then those are the correct answers. Those might be the same people, of course. They might be counted in both categories. That's fine. This is information that was collected on the old UCS 194.5 form, so we're just continuing that collection here. And now the last two questions are completely open-ended, completely optional, and just opportunities for you to tell us anything else that you want us to know. One example came up earlier, comes up quite a lot. If you happen to have an anomaly on July 1st so that your staffing numbers don't look right this year, I mean, they're accurate, but it so happens that you were down a couple of people at that point of the year, just tell us here. Very often people, as they're submitting data to us, want to explain something. They want to say the numbers are not what they should be, and here's why. It's just something that was going on last year. So it's, as I say, completely open-ended. Say whatever you want, as much as you want, a little as you want, or don't say anything. It's just an opportunity to put things in context. Sometimes if we see numbers that don't look right, we'll call people anyway, and the purpose of that call is usually to try and find out this context so you can preempt that call. You can say anything you want. And I shall say that. And then the next question is really continuing in the same spirit. What you can do here is you can upload a document. People often want to do this. They often want to send us their county budget or their annual report or anything else that you want. If you have a document that you want to send to us that you think helps put these data in context or just represents something that you want to explain, you can upload it on this question and it will come to us with your data so that they are all together. And that brings us to the end of part 1 and therefore to the end of our discussion of the form. And so this is kind of your last chance to ask questions of me about the form at this point. I'll open my chat box and I'll just give you a moment. If you want to unmute yourselves and speak your question, please go ahead. Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much for sitting through this. I know it's a lot of information to take in. Hope it was helpful. And now I am going to hand back to Gisela, who is here, of course, to speak about data officers. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Excuse me. And thanks, everyone, for staying on this Friday afternoon. Let's talk about data officers. So Andy mentioned earlier today that it is a valid use of statewide implementation funding to propose plans to upgrade the data infrastructure in your offices, as well as to improve the number of staff devoted to data collection. But there is also funding specifically allocated to staff each upstate county and New York City with one data officer per county and one data officer in New York City. The exception here are the Harrell-Herring counties, which, as mentioned earlier, follow a completely different data collection and reporting track. And this funding is allocated because we recognize that implementing the data requirements associated not only with the ILS 195, but also with the statewide implementation as a whole may represent a lift, and in some cases a heavy lift for counties. So it is with that in mind that we created this idea of a data officer, and we're going to talk a little bit about their roles and responsibilities as we envision them. What I wanted to do first, however, is to draw your attention back to that part of our website where the additional resources that Andy referred to are located. So under annual data reporting, under the subheading of ILS 195, that list of documents there that included, among other things, the ILS employee statistics worksheet also includes a detailed list of what we envision to be the roles and responsibilities of the data officers. That's the very last document there. If you haven't already taken a look at that, I know that just looking down the roster of participants here, I've been on the phone with many of you, and either me or somebody else on the team has emailed to your county this same list of roles and responsibilities. That's what we're going to be discussing next. But if you haven't seen it, this is where you find it. I invite you to go take a look and to refer to it as we move forward. So what are the roles and responsibilities of the data officers? The very main function of a data officer will be to work with us at ILS in operationalizing the data requirements. What does that mean? The main goal of having a data officer is essentially to have a liaison between ILS and the counties with the goal of standardizing data collection. To do so, obviously the data officers need to have an intimate knowledge of what these data requirements are. Among them is the ILS 195, as well as the definitions, not only the instructions and definitions associated with the form that we just discussed, but also with the definitions on how to count criminal cases that Andy also mentioned earlier. And again, I'll draw your attention to our website so that you can peruse that document if you haven't done so already. Besides this intimate knowledge of what we will be requiring and the definitions associated with what we'll be requiring, the data officers are expected to have the ability to implement the needed changes associated with these data requirements. What do I mean by that? Let us say that currently in a provider's office, you do not have the ability, or your billing system is not equipped to break out, for example, the expenditures between criminal and family cases. It is the role of the data officer to identify that gap in your current system and help you implement the needed changes. All of that, of course, because they're liaisoning with ILS, will happen in a collaborative way, and we hope that the data officers will seize on our in-house expertise to help fill these gaps. But I hope this gives you a sense of the kinds of things that we're expecting data officers to identify in terms of the system of data collection in each of your offices. Another example is, let's say later on, when we are requiring the caseload information for each office. Hypothetically, let's say one of the offices is not collecting the information in compliance with our case definitions. It will be the role of the data officer to advise and help implement the required changes so that we can have those data reported to us. And even more later on, when we are asking about outcomes per case type, again, it will be the data officer's role to identify whether, and I'm just going to give you a general example, whether, for example, you're able to track certain outcomes at arraignment, and if not, what changes need to be put in place. Again, in a collaborative way with us and seizing on the expertise that we already have. In addition to that, it is expected of the data officers that they are able to work with each provider in their county in a way that's impartial and consistent, and in essence, neutral. What does that mean? For the few counties that only have one provider, this is not as much as a complicating factor as in counties that have multiple providers, and that one data officer has to work with the multiple providers in implementing these required changes that we just talked about. What we are asking in those cases, because it's one data officer per county, that whoever is nominated or hired is somebody who is able to approach each provider in the county in a way that's neutral, and that's impartial, and that ultimately results in high-quality data that's reported to us through the implementation of these changes. So in other words, this person should be a data ambassador within the county to work to make sure that each provider in the county is in compliance with the data requirements that we have. And this will require the data officers a role of coordinating the data reporting back to us in a way that's uniform among the providers within the county, in a way that's accurate, and in a way that meets our deadlines. We also ask that the data officers for each county make themselves available to do two things. One, as I mentioned, the main goal of the data officer is to serve as a liaison between ILS and the counties, so there will be updates routinely on the data implementation made to us at ILS. These will be conversations that, among other things, should allow the data officers an opportunity to attest and explain the data accuracy within their county, the consistency of the data collection, as well as the quality of the data that we're about to receive, so that we can identify any potential hiccups. We know they will happen, and help resolve them along the way. We also ask that the data officers make themselves available to attend trainings, very much like the training today, but in some cases, if necessary, trainings in person. And this is something that we're still designing and thinking about, but at a minimum, there will be additional online trainings such as the webinar today, and the data officers are expected to be available to do that. So as your county is choosing or thinking about this position of the data officer, keep in mind that these folks should make themselves available to provide routine updates to us, as well as to attend trainings such as the one that we have today. We're also asking that the data officers have basic familiarity with the technology that's employed by providers in their county. For example, in many counties where you have multiple providers, it may be a fact that each provider's office has a different case management system. We do not expect that the data officer is proficient in each of these case management systems, but they have to be familiar enough with the technology in each of these offices so that they can understand why, for example, the existing billing system does not allow to track data as we want. So the familiarity is needed so that they can identify existing constraints regarding the software itself. I see, Sandra, that you have a question submitted to us in the chat box. I'll get to it in 1 second. I just have one note of caution, and then I'll turn to your question. I ask that you keep in mind that the responsibilities that we're discussing here today will evolve over time as the data requirements start to get implemented, and as the form grows incrementally as well, as Andy mentioned, part 2 and part 3 kick in later on. Typically at this time, I like to advance my 3 frequently asked questions about data officers, but I see that we have a question from Sandra, and I do not want to delay my response to it. Okay, thank you. Is there a prohibition with the data officer being an employee of the sole provider, but still act as a liaison with the county? Thank you, Sandra, for your question. That's usually my top FAQ. Where can the data officer be located? We're agnostic about where the data officer is located. The data officer can be located in a provider's office or as part of the county infrastructure. The one caveat, and it's an important caveat, is that wherever they are, they need to be able to function in a neutral, impartial, and consistent approach within the county and with each of the providers. I hope that answers your question. Frequently, I'm also asked about the issue of confidentiality and access to data in different providers' offices. I can assure you that this is something that we take very seriously, and that we do not envision data officers actually manipulating real data for each provider's office. The way we envision the role of the data officers is a role that has more to do with the process by which the data are collected, maintained, and reported to us, and less like somebody who's actually entering the data as a data staff would be doing. Oftentimes, to understand the process, you may have to use dummy data to see how the data travels all the way from port to a report that needs to be generated. But this can be done with dummy data and without violating any confidentiality issues. Another thing that I would like to raise has to do with our recognition that the way we have our funding structured is incremental, and therefore the funding grows over time, as you know, between now and 2023. This has implications for the appointment of data officers, as it has implications for all of your plans in general. In terms of the data officers, I can tell you that several counties have chosen at this point to hire or appoint somebody full-time to perform the role of the data officers by using the money that's allocated in year 1 and using additional funding from other parts of the statewide implementation bigger pot. Other counties have instead chosen to appoint somebody part-time or hire somebody part-time and grow their responsibilities over time. And yet other counties, have chosen to enter into contracts with specific individuals to fulfill the role of the data officers. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and there is some room for creativity. And the important thing is that we need to have somebody nominated for the data officer in year 1 that will work as a coordinator within your county, that will work as a liaison with ILS, and we can talk with Joanne and the team about what shape that data officer will take in year 1, with an eye on year 2023, when this really should grow and into a full-time position. I would like at this point also to remind you that even though we've focused on part one of the form today, if you go to the form proper, using that link that Andy pointed you to, ILS 195 demo on our website, you will be able to see parts 2 and 3 of the form. Again, this is still a work in progress, but we are confident that any changes will be minor. I invite you to check out the form in its entirety if you haven't already, because it may show you how this need will increase over time in terms of the demand on data collection, and this might give you some insight not only on the role of the data officers, but your current needs in terms of data staffing and technology upgrades. I see that we have another question here from Marissa. Could the data officer be someone who currently works at our office and dedicate the amount of hours needed to data officer duties and other positions at provider office as well? So I guess hopefully I've already answered part of that question. As I mentioned, you could start small and grow over time. You could start with an existing position and increase those responsibilities over time. Marissa, if your county does not have or the city, I'm sorry, I'm not sure where you're logging in from, the city, these conversations are ongoing with the team and with Joanne, and thank you, Queens. And with respect to the data officer in New York City specifically, I know that there have been meetings, three-way meetings between the certain providers at this point and MOSJ, and this is part of that conversation, and it should continue to be explored with Joanne and the team.
They can hire data officers.
But yes, absolutely, if you identify that you have a gap in terms of data collection and staff in your office, it is a legitimate use of the funding to increase your data personnel, per se. I hope that answers your question. Anyone else? I'm checking here. Thank you. I'm checking here this box, and I see nothing, but if you would like to, instead of typing, ask your question orally, just unmute yourself and speak up. All right. Well, so I think what I'll do at this point is wrap this up a few minutes early with, again, an invitation that you peruse our website and that you play with our ILS 195 demo if you haven't yet. And this was a big thank you for joining us for this very last session on training on the ILS 195. And I wish you all a very happy weekend. Thank you so much.